everybody. Thanks for joining me for another one-man review. Today I'll be taking a look at a really interesting anthology here called Plaine. This is a really kind of couture-bound thing where each signature is like a different artist working with different paper, different inks, different production tricks. So it's a really interesting physical piece. You can see the spine is just bound here on the side. This seems to be number 6 in a series, the Lagon Review. I'm not sure if that's the case, and it looks like it's coming from a French the Center of National du Graphisme du, from the National Center for Books, it looks like, in France. So it's a really interesting piece. I got it from Neoglyphic Media. I went there to order this and grabbed a couple of the other books that I've thrown up. But this one is the one that really was compelling to me because of all of the production tricks. So I'm going to go through and show each story here. Not every story has production tricks on it. This one by Jin Angdoo. I didn't quite get this story. It's about a chess master traveling back on a plane after having lost a chess match, basically. So that one's just a black and white thing. This piece here by Anna Haifisch. This is about a band that goes to play a gig and they get their drinks spiked, or someone gives them some drugs. So this one has some really fun production stuff here where it goes from black and white to then like this almost like rhizo spot color type of approach with the yellow, the blue, and the magenta separated out. So really kind of cool custom printing. And then into these watercolor, and it looks like some acrylic or gouache or something, paintings that are then being printed in here as well. And then back, this is like while they're tripping balls, and then back into the black and white stuff. So that one's really fun to look at, and the story was pretty fun. This piece here, this is by Melek Zertal. This is about some girls that go out and are picking mushrooms, and it's just a little short story about friends, but really nice art in that one. Here's Louka Butzbach. This is about someone who's really into free jazz, and they're getting onto a ship engine. They're on this big ship, and they start hearing the engine and thinking that the engine is kind of like the best music they've ever heard. I really like this diagrammatic approach here. Actually, the other thing about this book that I should mention, I don't have it with me, but it's a bilingual book. So some of the stories are in French, some are in English, and it came with a little floppy thing. I don't have it next to me. It came with a little floppy thing that's basically translation. So if you're in France and you're reading this and you're getting an English story, they'll have the French translation. Like this one's you see in French, so they have the English translation here. But here you see they do have the English that says Made in America. So I really like that. I really like this page, the diagram of all the different kind of musical, mechanical parts. And then here, this character that's listening to that is a stowaway who gets shot. And I just really like the cartooning and layouts on this page. Again, not a production trick like some of the other ones, but I thought that was a kind of interesting, beautiful little story. Here you have Flore Chemin. I don't know. I honestly can't tell you what this story was about. I read it and was just kind of lost. But I do like this balloon that they're making here with a bunch of other balloons in it that they can float away on. Really, really trippy, surreal little stories that I can't explain. Here with this Sébastien Sans-Arcidet, you start to get some variations in like production and whatnot. So here you have, it's all on this shiny paper, whereas these are on this like yellow matte paper. This one is about someone who has a moment where language loses its actual semantic content and just becomes pure content, just pure noise. And I really like the visual representation here of like, it's all language and it's familiar. This is a character who's hearing the language that they do speak, but it just becomes decontextualized and visceral for them, which is an interesting thought. I've had that moment. Here's François De Jonge. This is now where we get into some trick ink. So you can see this has like this metallic silver on it. It's basically a little bit story about like a planet that people are going on to, this collapsed civilization, and some really nice like watercolor drawings, really nice sci-fi watercolor drawings throughout. And then on the side, just to spice it up, I don't think it adds much other than design, but you get this like kind of silver on here. Then this piece here, the Visit the Archives, really, really cool. I'm not sure if, I'm assuming it's just printed on green paper since it's its whole own signature on this. This is by Paul Lemaitre. This is a soul kind of getting a tour of a body before it takes over. So all of this here where you're like being sucked into this perspective, and you've got this lettering all on the sides, really cool design. And the dialogue here in the boxes, the captions, I guess, describe this soul kind of flying in, and okay, we're going to go down that path, and that brings you to the heart, and then we'll go here and it brings you to the brain, and then by the end of it, you kind of become the character now inhabiting the body. Like you come up to it and it's like, here's the mic, now you can talk. So you're kind of like looking through its eyes, and then they hand over control to you. So I really like that one. I like the flow of the story. Is a very kind of psychedelic trip. Being John Malkovich, like, you know, at first I'm just reading a story about someone else exploring the space, and then I become the thing. This here, this piece by Jack Tezam is one of the most beautiful things in the book. It's printed all in this kind of golden coppery ink with this really delicate line work. This is Promethea by Alan Moore and J.H. Williams is one of my favorite books of all time, and I've always been sad that they didn't do the double wide edition that they talked about. And I always knew that if they did the double wide, they weren't going to do it the way I wanted to see it anyways, which is, I think that book could be redone because it's such a piece of art itself. Like there's an issue that's printed with like yellow ink on white paper, but it was definitely intended to be like gold. And I've always wanted to see that printed exactly like this, maybe with a golder gold, not as bronzy of a gold. But now that we have things that can be printed in metallic inks, I think a book like Promethea that really changes styles and changes materials could benefit from a printing like this, where you go back and you have gold inks and you have blacklight inks on one of the issues, and like poster art kind of paper on another one. And so I think this is the first time I've ever seen anything close to what I imagined on that issue, which has similar kind of delicate artwork. And I don't know how well it comes across on camera, but some of these delicate pieces here, when they look like they're done with, it basically looks like it's done with a gold point pencil or bronze point pencil or something like that. It's just really, really beautiful. It doesn't add up to much in terms of a story for me. It was just this sequence of interesting drawings and compositions, but really beautiful stuff. And then we get another piece here by Sun Ni and Chihoi. Again, it's on like a kind of silvery paper. This is just a poetics of form thing, basically just things unpacking themselves or books being bent. I don't know what it adds up to. It's just purely visual, but really cool on that paper. This is by Clément Faydit and Rozenn Voyer. Again, I don't know what this means, but it does have this silver ink printed on it. So in these spots like this where you have the grout between the different pieces of the glass there, this can peeled back, you know, there's this silver throughout, which makes the images more interesting. Don't know what the story's about. And again, this seems like a little gimmicky, tricky. It doesn't have much to do with the story, but it looks cool. This is by Marie Jacotey. I think it's a breakup poem with a bunch of abstract visuals. It was really interesting talking about like in the breakup, wrapping back around and figuring that you were the one. So this like Moebius strip kind of thing here. This character's realizing their culpability in the relationship. So I found this one quite enjoyable, actually, for how poetic it was. That the visuals and the words did seem to go together. Here we have a piece. This one here is by Matt Mullican. This is printed again with like on the edges and sometimes in the images itself, kind of like this matte metallic silver. Don't know if that comes across on the paper. Seems largely just because it looks cool, doesn't seem to contribute much, but it does add to the sense. Like if it had been printed on this part, it would have looked more like graphite, which I think would be an interesting look. So a lot of these like trick inks and trick papers that they're using in this book, I don't know that they use them in a way that actually adds much other than visual appeal. I would like to see a book like this lean into this stuff having some kind of content impact as well. This is Zoë Taylor. A little bit trouble with this one. I think it was just memories about a relationship. Seems just like sketches to me, but that on a page like this, I think is really well designed. Looks more like the lack of drawing going on. Makes it look more like memory. Then in the middle here, you get what's very obviously a screen print as kind of the middle piece. This is by Jin Angdoo, who I believe also did, the front and back covers. And again, there's kind of like these low luster metallic inks going on here that make everything look like really cool. Almost, they almost have like a Mark Rothko vibe. There's a Yūichi Yokoyama story. It's really cool to see Yokoyama on this nice, super glossy paper. I think that fits his vibe. And this is just someone flipping through a book, which is a typical Yokoyama, something as mundane as flipping through a book becomes the most exciting thing ever in his hands. So always happy with some Yokoyama Yūichi. Here's another one that's printed with I don't know if it's even metallic, but it's like a strange, barely metallic kind of ink. It's nice. This is by Séverine Bascouert. Can't say much about the story, but really like the designs, really like the cartooning on it. Again, the ink looks nice, but I don't think it adds much. Oh, here's this is the translation. So there's this whole book here that's just got all the translations for both English and French, depending on what the story's in. So that was cool, because normally a book like this, I would get it and I wouldn't be able to read it, I wouldn't be able to enjoy it. But knowing that I can buy it with the translation thing, it's like, okay, I'll lean into that foreign language book. This one, here's another one that uses like a really shiny paper and kind of almost like some neon inks, and then again it has like this coppery ink in it. This is by Laetitia Gendre. Don't really know what it adds up to, but it's interesting. This is by Denis Boudouard. There's a few pieces by Denis Boudouard in here, I think. And I'm kind of uncomfortable with their inclusion, because this is obviously someone who was heavily autistic. And then they say in the translation book sometimes also have notes about the stories. And they say that this is someone who is autistic, like deeply autistic, but with enhanced perceptual functioning. So I think what they're saying is that this guy, and I've had students like this who are basically non-functionally autistic, but all they do is draw. And so I think that's what this is. And then in the translation, they were translating it with his spelling, doing their best to mimic his spelling errors. So there's like spelling and grammar errors in the French, I guess, that they were mimicking. And that just, I get it. It's interesting to see inside of the mind of someone like this. And the one student in particular I'm thinking of, who was that autistic, nonverbal, but drew a lot. It was really fun and interesting to work with someone who was 100% totally there. They were just there in a way different than the rest of us, completely attentive to everything I said, but, communicated entirely through drawings pretty much. And that's interesting. And so I get why people would want to collect it, but it also kind of just feels weird to have like, oh, let's preserve their weird, goofy, autistic spelling errors and things, and then to print it with like this gold coppery thing when it was obviously drawn in pencil. I really doubt that the artist intended for this to be done in gold, so it just seems a bit predatory of the outsider artist to me. And there's a couple of them in there, like whoever put this book together I think is pretty interested in this character. This is by Sewell Rodon. Not a particularly interesting story. I would have liked to see it, especially because it's blue on like really thin, funky paper. But I do like here where the words kind of turn into almost like rainfall. But I didn't find that one that compelling. Really like the art in this one. This is by Paul Deschamps. Strange kind of surreal story again, but really like the art throughout this. But kind of psychedelic with these nice soft watercolors to it. And this one's printed on a nice like matte paper that goes well with it. This is another one of the Denis Boudouard stories that they translated. Again, I don't know what's with the orange. That seems like a production decision on their side, not something that this artist would have done. Like the reason I'm saying this kind of stuff is because this is obviously someone who's just doing this stuff on their own. They're picking up their markers and pencils and stuff, and it just doesn't seem like they'd be thinking about, like these outsider artists are doing it for themselves. They're not thinking about, I'm going to put an orange border on it. So that's where I get uncomfortable, is like, you're not just showing this artist off, you're kind of like taking them and turning them into something they're not even intended to be on their own. Adriaen Coenen, I think is how you pronounce the name. There wasn't translations on this. I don't know if it's even readable or if this is all nonsense, but it just kind of looks like an old book that scrapbook that someone found. So visually cool. Again, I don't think there was anything to get out of the story. This is a really interesting Poetics of Form story here. I really like this by Xavier Robel. Kind of reminds me of Yokoyama Yūichi, but taking it even more abstract. Also playing with how images are put together with those dot patterns. So really like that one. This is another one that has these metallic inks in it, so it looks very cool. This is by Sammy Stein, and this is another one where you're kind of like in the, I think it was in the other book I reviewed, where you zoom in into this character's mind. This one is a book that kind of becomes a meta immersion. So here you have like, what's this? It's this book. And then you start reading this book. And I think in this case, the silver actually contributes, because it's talking about like what a interesting special book this is. And so it, like, having this silver on here kind of adds to it. And it's going through like all of these different things that, like, this is actually a book that, like, when reading this, it seems like you're basically experiencing all of everything, all of existence. And having that silver on there, I think, kind of adds to that idea that this is a special book that's kind of somehow capturing something different about reality. And then by the end, now, like, you're actually, like, the book is falling apart. And so it's like now you're not reading a story about the book, you're reading the book itself in a sense, and that's cool. This piece here by Daria Chernyshovy is really, really cool Poetics of Form stuff. Very diagrammatic, almost like a color by number. I don't know what this all adds up to, but in this one there seems like there's some kind of plan on the artist's part. Whether that's real or not, I don't know, but with all these little numbers and like these little combinations of colors and this like categorization system, I think it's all a bunch of nonsense. I think this is someone who's just using the visuals of like a bullet journal or something to provide something purely visual, but I could be wrong. I'm always interested in stuff like this. Like, this feels very much like a Wolfram kind of automatic image coming together. There just seems to be like some conceptual art, rule bound art making here that's very compelling to me. Like here this is very suggestive of like dice rolling. So maybe there was some system here where, depending on how the dice were rolled, the different colors got picked and the amount, it's just suggestive to me that there's like a rule behind it, and then I get curious about the rules. So I find this to be really, really compelling. I have no idea what it's about, but I think this is probably something where, when the artist was working on it, they were having a lot of fun letting some rules or constraints drive them, and then putting it together in a way that's just really aesthetically compelling. I really like that story. Well, not story, but that piece. This one here is by Félicité Landrivon. This one also has, I don't know about metallic inks, it's just like the way that the paper is soaking it up. Again, not sure. These are, as you can tell, a lot of these are pretty experimental little pieces. But design-wise, I really like what this looks like. Don't know what it means, but cool. cool. This one here is strange, this little printed on green paper. This is by Bettina Henni. I don't know what that was. I don't remember what the note said. Then this one's printed on this super glossy paper, and all of the inks in it are metallic, which is really wild to look at. And again, I don't know how much this stuff comes across on screen. But this is one where I feel like the art in it, let's see who's the artist on this, by Acacio Ortas. The art on it is like pretty rudimentary, and it's being carried by this like fun production trick. The artist did a great job with picking all the colors, but I think this is another one where I feel like they got a hold of someone's kind of funky art and then they like slicked it up with the production a bit, but there wasn't notes to that extent in the book. So again, this is one of those ones that leaves me saying, man, you know, like this looks really cool, but it's not doing anything for the story, and I'd like to see people do something with it. This piece here by Chris Harnon and Julian Goblet, this actually takes this metallic ink and the slick production and does something with it. So this is a kind of poetic thing, but it is bilingual, and some of it you had to read in the translation book, but some of it is actually here where it says Ti possesside. Right here, it's a little hard to read, but you can see it's again in English. It says owning you and you me. So you got all this really nice kind of color work and painted, like almost spray painted imagery in the back, and then you have both translations, and that's like writing oftentimes in a distorted lettering with these dots in that silver. So there's this sense of like this language barrier in place, and this thing haunting the air between two people. The real you, free myself. I think that's what it's saying. It's a little hard to read, but to me it seems like that silver ink is playing some kind of function in the content of the story, and I really like the compositions in all of these. So really enjoyed that one. I would like to see more of this kind of thing where the production trickery seems to add to the content. Here we have another like poetic piece. This is by Jean-Philippe Bretin. They're talking about this story. It's basically a story written here, and then there's just these illustrations, again kind of on this like metallic looking ink, or it's metallic ink on glossy paper. But the story here is interesting, and you're getting all of these like abstracted shots of people's noses that have been used to make these designs here. And the story is about a world where one day there was a smell that came along that everyone could smell. It was an unpleasant smell, and everyone could smell it. But unlike an unpleasant smell, no one ever got used to it, except for people who were born after the smell came along. They grew up with it, so they couldn't smell it. And I thought that's just a really interesting like sci-fi conceit of a world where, based on when you were born, you either could or couldn't smell something. Two people living in the same world, or two bodies of people, two groups of people occupying the same world, and one has access to a part of that world and the other doesn't, I think is a really interesting idea. I don't know that the visuals that go with it add much to that, and I don't know that all of the metallic inks add much to that story either, but it looks cool, and it's a fun idea. And then this is another one by the Denis Boudouard, and again, I think they're just making these strange, like these are the pieces that he was doing, and they're making these strange production decisions to put these dots all over the place. So I do wish they would have just not included this guy, but I don't know the story there. And then here on the back, you're just getting the credits. And again, you kind of have these metallic inks making these splatters all over the place. And then some more screen printing here on the front and the back to make the covers. So a really gorgeous book that is really well cared for in the production. It's just an amazing piece of production. The stories, as you can see, are a little bit hit and miss for me. Some really beautiful visual stuff. But I don't think anything in the book like really added up to a powerful piece in terms of like saying something. So this is just another one of these examples of like, this is where production can go. And I love that there's people that are at the forefront of this, pushing Oh, here's the other one. This is the other one where, so there's that. These are my two favorite pieces, actually. This one and the one of the book, where you kind of, in both of them, you get sucked into this meta experience. Those were my two favorite. And I think these are the ones that were making, this one making use of the silver to the effect. So I love that there are these people like at the front guard, at the avant-garde, pushing the boundaries of what can be done with production. I would just personally like to see, if you're pushing production like that, make it have some type of meaning, or just poetics of form stuff like this. I think when you're dealing with poetics of form, then the form and the content are the same thing, and the fact that it's on silver has a formal impact, and things changing colors or things going in and out of metallics, that kind of justifies itself if you're working purely formally. But I think this kind of stuff is like a guidebook for the rest of us. The rest of us can look at this and get ideas, and then take it and turn it into something that's maybe a little more narratively solid, something that plays out over a longer course of time, a whole project that's finished like this. But I would love to make a book like this, like an anthology that's based around production tricks, like each person getting their own signature. And I would love to see more things produced like this, where people figure out what's the extent of what we can do with offset printing or with the Riso printing. And then from there, once we kind of have that vocabulary, I think then you'll start to see people leveraging it for really powerful stories. So books like this book Plaine, are really cool, and I think really important. So if you can get yourself a copy of it, definitely get it. Don't be turned off by the fact that like a lot of it's in French, because it does come with a cool little translation pamphlet here. It's not the best reading experience to go back and forth between the two, but I think for a project as special as this is a pretty good solution. And I wouldn't mind buying more books like this if people are doing these kind of things. So really cool book. Definitely check it out. If this is more experimental comics is your thing, this would be a great piece to pick up. If you enjoy what we're doing here on the channel, you enjoy the books like this that we're exposing you to, and you want to support us, there's two ways to do that. The first is through our Patreon. On Patreon, we have two different tiers of engagement. The first tier, you just get early access to the videos. At the second tier, you get exclusive access to projects that Sean and I are working on, our personal artwork, and then also the ability to participate and vote and help control where our webcomic experiment Plaine Day goes. That's an experiment where we're playing with the AI as it updates. We do new versions of the story, and the readers get to help determine where the story goes. Any of the money that we make from Patreon just goes right back into the books that we buy. It just helps us buy the books, so we try and put that back into the community and keep you all in books to check out and things to think about buying. If you want to support Living the Line itself, the best thing to do is support what Sean's doing with Living the Line Publishing. So we'll go ahead and take a look at one of his projects now. Plaza by Yokoyama Yūichi. This is translated by Ryan Holmberg and is very large for a manga, so that's a really cool feature of this book. This standard manga size, and this is just a 200 some odd page representation of what Yokoyama Yūichi thinks of the Carnival parade, and he's just made this like relentlessly loud and rhythmic book that pushes all kinds of amazing boundaries of what comics and manga are, and we could not recommend this book more. Thanks for following along. Take it away, Jack.